Welcome, everybody. My name is Shi Tan, pronouns she, her, and I am a middle-aged woman wearing a green shirt with purple hair. I'm speaking to everyone from London, where I'm researching music and sound studies. So today's theme, which is intersecting modalities in music and dance research and dissemination, is part of our ongoing ICTMD Dialogue series, which has been running for 2 years at least, and bringing in such a huge and exciting, interesting audience from all around the world with people coming from so many different stories and backgrounds and speaking in multiple languages. We've got very exciting 5 speakers today. Also, just to say that for the purposes of making sure the event is running smoothly, most of our speakers will be giving short introductions of themselves, but speaking from pre-recorded short segments. Although this is going to be very interactive and there's a chat function and Q&A, more of which my colleague, Professor Sarah Weiss is going to talk about. This is just to let everyone know how things are running as part of today's session, and also that the meeting is being recorded for the purposes of sharing later. So if you feel uncomfortable speaking up or sharing your visual image, please withhold the camera, or if you're happy, join us and show us who you are on video. So I'm going to just hand over the platform to my colleague Sarah, who's going to explain more about what's going to happen. Bye
Good
for now.
morning. Thanks, Shai. Good morning, everyone. Following along in the descriptions of self, I'm going to say that I'm an energetic person with a lot of enthusiasm for my field. I teach at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Graz, where I'm professor for ethnomusicology, and I love problem solving. Before I continue with the structure of the panel and the whole dialogues, I'd like to invite Soy Bang, our illustrious president, to tell us, just to give us a good welcome. Please, Soy Bang.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we begin, I'd like to say a little bit about what we are going to do for the next two dialogues for 2025. This year's themes have been influenced by ideas that there are many types of musicologies and that there are many ways of knowing and conducting research and many ways of producing knowledge in the world. So through the dialogues, we would like to create a space, not just for highlighting diversity, but to put the different models in dialogue so that new intersections and possibilities can emerge. At the same time, as we live in a world where there's a lot of crisis, the Dialogues Committee members are also concerned about the ethics of care for our colleagues in ICTMD, and the people that they work with. So in the second dialogue, we bring into conversation how ICTMD members have coped with and how they manage the man-made or natural disasters, conflicts, violence, medical crises, and technological issues that affect their lives and their research. So this year we have selected presenters from different countries all over the world to kickstart the dialogues. Next year, we intend to do an open call for presentations on the same themes, and we will open the call to all members of ICTMD. So thank you very much. This is all I'm going to say. Over to you, Chi.
I'm going to actually just invite our very first speaker today. Yep.
Could we just wait? I just want to tell the people who are here about the structure of today's panel.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's not exactly in the order in which one might expect. So in an effort to really turn this into a dialogue where people get to speak and talk about things that they have that are burning after someone's talk, what we've decided to do is each person has prepared a 10-minute video. In the first section of this dialogue session, we will hear 3 of the videos, and then we will open the floor up to the community for about 20 minutes. Then we will close, even though there'll be a line of people wanting to talk. That's okay. Then we will continue with the last two presenters, and then we will have a conversation among the panelists just to get them talking, and then we will open up once again to the entire community. And we hope that this will make it so that people talk about more than just the last paper that's been presented, which is often the case. When you listen to 5 papers, you think you remember the first and the last. So without further ado, we invite our first panelist, who is, is Pirkko Moisala, to introduce herself, and then we will roll her film.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to talk, and thank you to everybody who sits there by the screen. So I am Pirkko Moisala, and I am Professor Emerita of Musicology and Ethnomusicology from the University of Helsinki. And as a retired professor, I'm pretty glad about my grandchildren nowadays, but maybe even more enthusiastic about philosophies, be they Western philosophies or indigenous philosophies or Asian philosophies. Those all are close to my heart. In the true spirit of dialoguing, I will start by catching the ball which Samuel Araujo threw in the introduction of Dialogue 1. After generously crediting the enterprises of decolonizing ethnomusicological work, which I also wish to acknowledge here, Araujo posed this challenging question. Are we fundamentally decolonizing and transforming music and dance studies under new premises, or just refiguring this broad field of study under the same unequal and oppressive conditioning frame? Araujo's question resonates with my own experiences of the past 50 years, when I have been engaged with indigenous musical worlds, collaborating with the Tamus of Nepal, the Sami of Northern Europe, as well as the Inuit of Greenland, including Inuit of northernmost Greenland. The work in Greenland I have conducted in collaboration with Clisala Harrison. Throughout these decades, I have been disturbed by the fundamental onto-epistemological differences and unbalanced power positions between Western academic and indigenous thought and musical lives. Molding with writing indigenous music into Western academic form forces one to privilege and therewith to give more value to the Western worldview and conception of music over the indigenous thinking and ways of being in the world that I have learned to appreciate highly. I have felt that also the transcribing Western music with Western notational system violates it. What has basically disturbed me has been the fundamental onto-epistemological differences and unbalanced power positions between an academic world and indigenous thoughts and musicalized ways of life. Unlike Western onto-epistemologies, which overwhelmingly privilege humans, indigenous peoples' knowledge formations include non-human elements and beings as well. Based on this experience, my answer to Araujo's question is that indeed, all we do is just refigure our field under the same oppressive and unequal frame, so long as we do not take distance from or disregard the anthropocentric approach typical of Western thinking. Since the early days of colonialism and capitalism, Western thought has been dominated by the anthropocentric conception of man, the anthropos, a shorthand for Western male with an unlimited right and obligation to exploit everyone and everything that can be exploited. Diverging from any human-centered Western view, and despite internal differences and complexities, of course, indigenous peoples broadly share certain trends of understanding the universe, nature, and the roles of humans in it. These emphasize the interconnectedness and interdependence of everything, human and non-human. In recent indigenous rights movements towards protecting nature as a living being with human rights, and in sustainable science, indigenous people have spoken for their nature-respecting ways of life as well as cosmologies that support instead of exploit nature. Today, many philosophers, social scientists, arts and humanities researchers understand that Western human-centeredness is leading to climate catastrophe. The so-called one world model, which relies on anthropocentrism and recognizes only its exploitative truth, is now widely believed to be at the root of the climate crisis. Solutions are now urgently sought in other onto-epistemologies, among them indigenous thinking. At the forefront of these discussions is posthumanism, an interdisciplinary field of study which is motivated by climate change and related ecological crisis. Taking a critical stance to Western anthropocentrism, it explores from different perspectives all kinds of interconnections and assemblages of the human and the non-human. Humans are seen as one kind of participant among many others in assemblages of becoming. In doing that, the very notion of what is a man and his position in the universe is questioned. When reading this posthumanist literature, I have been struck by its vast similarities with indigenous thinking. However, and unfortunately, hardly any Western scholar gives credit to indigenous onto-epistemologies that have supported a posthuman worldview for millennia. What has happened can be called knowledge colonialism. And of course, unfortunately, I don't have time to go deeper in this. What is essential here is that philosopher Rosi Braidotti, who is also called as the mother of critical posthumanism, has challenged us academics in the humanities to reorganize our disciplines to respond to posthumanism and examine critically the limitations of Western human-centeredness. In a similar line of thought, Inuit tradition bearer, author and drum singer Ishu, one of my indigenous collaborators, has pointed out how Westerners are bound by senses of human perception recognized by Western materialism. The Inuit view of music and song being everything, everything is music, music is everything, rejects a materialist notion of sensory perception. Ishu and Inuit hear music as both human and non-human without separating them, sensing music, such as Inuit drum singing, can produce an energetically transformative experience, which for them is substantially about experiencing the non-human. Music is what the non-human does to the listener. When posthumanism as a Western tradition of thought and theory is commensurable with whether posthumanism as Western tradition of thought is commensurable with indigenous worldviews has been debated. Nevertheless, critical posthumanism, together with indigenous onto-epistemologies, that both are critical of exploitative colonialism and capitalism, set new premises or new questions to our field, such as, what would moving away from anthropocentrism mean in terms of ethnomusicology? First of all, we should explicitly move from studying music as humanly organized sound. The central role of people in the study of people making music must be enlarged to see humans only as parts in rhizomatic constellations of not only social, economic, and cultural factors, but also living materialities and non-human beings. Thus, the suggestion I make in these 10 minutes of online fame is this. We should study music as assemblages in which both material and non-material, human and non-human elements resound. In these assemblages, non-scientific and non-human agencies, together with diverse anthroepistemologies, not only scientific ones, should be equally included as relevant knowledge formation. This is also required by the pluriversalist approach in which acknowledges many ways of knowing and being in the world, as well as perspectivism and multinaturalism originating from South American indigenous contexts. We need to expand our critical examination of human-centered Western thinking while recognizing its colonial history and present power positions in attempts to create space for other kinds of knowledge formations regarding music. Of course, many studies have already been done from parallel enlarged views of musicking, and in the ICTMD, most have focused on indigenous musics. But we should do more and listen more carefully and respectfully in an effort to dissolve any remnants of othering in the process of conceptualizing and communicating research results, which of course should be micro-tuned to resolve different constellations of inequality. All in all, I believe that ethnomusicology has much to provide to smooth our way away from anthropocentrism. After all, music, as we all know and experience, moves fluidly between worldly and otherworldly.
Thank you very much, Pirkko. I think we can move on to our next video, and if you hang on with us and keep your thoughts or post them in the chat for later, we can follow up.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Hello everyone and good evening from Aotearoa, New Zealand and Te Whanganui Atara, otherwise known as Wellington. As I speak from Aotearoa, I acknowledge the unique role of Māori as tangata whenua and also the importance of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, recognizing Māori as tino rangatiratanga of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I want to thank the ICTMD organizers for this very interesting event and for including me. As an appropriate way to begin from Aotearoa, I'll start with a short karakia. This spoken incantation was composed by Rawinia Higgins and Mike Ross here at Victoria University, and as in a general protocol to open a meeting or an event, it's words of unity and purpose appropriate for our gathering. Māori oho, Māori tū, Māori ora, kia tātou, homi e, hui e, tā iki e. For this short presentation, I wish to offer some ideas and positions toward interdisciplinary research that involves music and sound, indigenous studies, and astrophysics, topics perhaps not always linked together. I discuss these in 3 project threads that we are working on, one about indigenous song, the second about sound and space science, and the third about a new indigenous sonification projects. This research is preliminary and within a recently funded 2-year project with multiple collaborators, many of which are seen here. To bring you into this topic, I ask you to join me at dawn, 6:30 a.m. on 24th June 2022 on the Wellington waterfront. Here, a group of Māori tribal leaders, alongside academics, indigenous leaders, and Jacinta Ardern, then Prime Minister, and the public, all gathered in the glowing light to officially open the new national celebration of Matariki, the Māori New Year, a newly established national holiday in 2022. Matariki represents the start of the Māori New Year, taken from the lunar calendar. It also represents the star cluster known globally as the Pleiades, or by astronomers as Messier 45. The New Year celebrates the first dawn rising of the star cluster Matariki, and after its western setting in early June and its absence for 1 month. As I attended the 2022 dawn ceremony, there was an outpouring of new and traditions of music that permeated the waterfront and that were voiced to the sky, and that traced the genealogy of individual named stars and within their earthly meaning. Listening at dawn, I was struck by how the vocal rhythms intersected with the longer celestial time cycles unfolding as the cluster rose once again in winter skies. Here's a brief example from that morning, and just a very, very short audio video example. While Matariki has a celestial basis, it is of course important for humanity. The celebration asks us to recall those who have passed. It signals completion of harvests and is a time for people to share food, stories, and songs. I should add that not all Māori view the Matariki cluster as the focus, but tribes inland without a horizon view focus on the blue supergiant star Puenga or Rigel seen here, and which rises higher in the sky. Matariki is an open cluster, a loose gravitational collection of young, hot blue-white stars, and relatively close at 444 light-years away. As a young cluster, Matariki only formed within the last 100 million years, fairly new in celestial time. Our view of the cluster is somewhat deceptive. The group of 1,380 blue stars is passing behind a patch of dusty sky in the constellation of Taurus. Thus, the fuzzy veil we see, such as the image here that I took in February 2025, is separate from the stars, but is the star light passing through the dust. Matariki has initiated a new cultural focus in New Zealand, including in song and new compositions, events and festivals, and online and published resources, but the National Day focused in the Indigenous calendar has also had a wider impact. In Hawaii, the celebration and cluster is Makali'i, while in Tahiti in French Polynesia, it is Matari'i. And Maori and Tahitians have collaborated for a new national holiday in Tahiti later this year. Across the Pacific, there are similar names and practices, all of which bring together time cycles within communities and those across the celestial sphere. The cultural and musical focus on Matariki is not an isolated example, and this brings me to the first of my threads, songs as repositories of cultural and astronomical knowledge. Across Oceania and elsewhere, much knowledge about stars and astronomy is held within specific song repertories and related oral histories. In Micronesia, for example, there is a body of song forms focused on Fusamakit, or the star Polaris, that imparts knowledge of its fixed position in the sky around which the stars move across the year. And its importance is for westward navigation across hundreds of kilometers of sea. While in Hawaii, mele or song and chant repertories may focus on Arcturus, the star Hokulea, also the star of gladness. And that points the way home in voyages from the south, such as in Tahiti. What do song forms as indigenous storehouses of astronomical knowledge tell us about cultural, social, and environmental relationships with stars and the night sky across Oceania? Within this idea, we also should consider the importance of expressive forms as a means of indigenous scientific knowledge that record information about the near and visible universe. In Micronesia, song knowledge of the sky names routes between islands that can be retraced in archival song for voyages made in the far distant past. Thus, recorded songs are key to these sonic maps of knowledge. In the second research thread, and from a different perspective, we are also investigating the recent surge in new sound and astronomy projects in science that focus on public listening to sounds about and with space. While we know that space is a vacuum and thus silent, this has not prohibited many new forms of space listening, and especially in science research. These have taken many forms, including new playlists from NASA made from recorded data of planets and deep sky objects, new acoustic observations such as the recent listening to the wind and seismic quakes on Mars, and many have received much media attention. Scientists capture plasma waves, radio emissions, and other electromagnetic signals, shifting them into the human hearing range and making the phenomenon audible, and with further manipulation. In fact, sound has always been part of space science, in, for example, the golden disk of music, which included indigenous Pacific music, that was taken into deep space aboard the Voyager spacecraft in 1977. In this thread, we ask how science organizations use acoustic data for both research and public engagement, and by extension, how listening to space has resulted in new imaginings of the universe and the unknown. The third thread of this research brings both of these aspects together. The NASA sonification project takes data from astrophysical objects such as planets, nebula, and galaxies, and converts this interesting sound through sonification. The NASA project suggests that sonifications allow the audience, including visually impaired communities, to listen to astronomical images and thus explore their data. For this third thread, called Fostering Maturanga, or Maori Knowledge and Inclusion in Space Science, Maori instrument specialists Jerome Kavanagh and Ruia Turner are working to come up with a Maori methodology in order to assign specific Maori instrumental sounds to name starlight data in Matariki and other clusters, and thus provide sonifications fully within Indigenous practice. Our astrophysics team members are providing guidance to the space data, and the integration is overseen by colleagues in sound and engineering. Although I don't have an example for you today, later this year we are planning to release a new set of sonifications of Matariki fully based on Maori sound perspectives, and thus open new conversations in the sciences and the humanities. The last point I will make is to ask how new cross-disciplinary research might be strategically important in times of research trouble. Here in New Zealand, our current Conservative government has removed many humanities grants and funding resources, and certainly this situation is not isolated globally for the arts and humanities, as we all know. In New Zealand, working with our astrophysics and Indigenous studies colleagues has opened up many new areas of research. I suggest here that working into areas of science, business, law, and others for which there is a great body of past work offers new ways to not only foreground the impact of the humanities, but also engages new colleagues in support and collaboration for new ideas. Ngā mihi nui, thank you all very much for listening. Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Brian, for this really interesting exploration of multidimensional spaces and sound spaces. I just realized that in our haste to keep time, we forgot to invite you to introduce yourself very briefly. I wonder whether you might be able to do this retrospectively for us.
Good. Thank you very much, and very happy to. And thank you, everyone. My name is Brian Dietrich. I'm speaking to you, as I mentioned, from Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I work at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Most of my research is on music and dance of Oceania. I have a daughter, age 11. I am wearing small round glasses and a plain t-shirt, and I'm constantly grasping my mug of green tea here at 10 p.m. in New Zealand. Good to see you all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Brian. I think I should, should I go ahead? I'll go ahead. Our next speaker is Andrea Chamorro Perez, and we do not see her here in the group. If that is incorrect, please turn your mic on and say something, Andrea, or whoever it is who may be speaking for her. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll save her introduction for later, and we will ask Carlos to play Andrea's video now. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, me gustaría comenzar dando las gracias al Consejo Internacional de Tradiciones de la Música y la Danza y por supuesto a su presidenta, Sui Bentan, por esta amable invitación y por coordinar este evento. Sepan que es maravilloso formar parte de esta conversación. Esta presentación se basa en mi investigación y experiencia etnográfica con las danzas andinas del carnaval Inti Chamampi, que significa con la fuerza del sol. Este carnaval es un festival que las poblaciones indígenas migrantes de la cordillera de los Andes celebran cada año en la ciudad de Arica, en la frontera norte entre Chile y Perú. Junto con la observación participante como bailarina, una de las primeras estrategias de investigación que desarrollé fue realizar descripciones fotográficas y audiovisuales, ya que me permitían observar cuerpos, escenarios y actuaciones. Cabe señalar que desde el siglo XIX, el uso de cámaras en la investigación antropológica ha tenido como objetivo capturar la realidad, clasificar y explicar el mundo siguiendo la historia única de Occidente. Sin embargo, durante el trabajo de campo, pronto me di cuenta que las manifestaciones expresivas indígenas, como autorrepresentaciones, excedían o superaban su documentación, ya que la presencia de los bailarines entablaba un diálogo corporal con el público y el entorno, transformándolos. En palabras de Deborah Poole, los festivales y las danzas constituyen regímenes alternativos de visión y escucha en los que el cuerpo perturba la episteme cartesiana. Es así como, a pesar de la expresividad de las imágenes y los sonidos, pronto empecé a sentir que no transmitían la emoción que se experimenta al bailar. En particular, el universo multisensorial del festival me llevó a fantasear con aventuras poéticas en las que expresaba mis impresiones barrocas. Más aún, dejarme educar por los bailarines produjo cambios o indisciplina en el uso de imágenes y sonidos como estrategia de documentación. Comprendiendo las representaciones culturales indígenas como estéticas y conocimientos que han surgido frente a una larga y dolorosa historia de violencia y exclusión, repito la pregunta ya planteada por David McDougall sobre la presencia en las películas. ¿De quién es la historia? En otras palabras, ¿a quién pertenecen las historias y representaciones de los demás? A través de esta pregunta sostiene que en muchos casos las representaciones etnográficas audiovisuales no solo han sido apropiadas por los pueblos indígenas para rescatar y recrear prácticas y ceremonias perdidas. McDougall señala que las películas y las grabaciones también describen el cuerpo detrás de la cámara y su relación con las personas, otros seres y sus entornos. En mi caso, la exploración audiovisual favoreció la comprensión experimental sobre la explicación. En palabras de Tim Ingold, me guiaron a desarrollar un arte de la investigación en la que la experimentación no responde al diseño de una hipótesis, sino más bien a una apertura al mundo. Para mí, la transición de la grabación audiovisual a la creación de una danza en la pantalla ha sido un acto de transgresión con respecto al ejercicio de producir resultados. El ser afectada por el arte indígena devino en una indisciplina o un momento de caos o asombro, cuando una forma de hacer las cosas revela lo inadecuada que es. Aprendí de los bailarines y familias andinas que mirar con atención requiere fuerza, calma y afecto, donde el afecto no puede ser abstracto. Por lo tanto, honré las emociones y energía de la experiencia, sustituyendo las descripciones teóricas por una imaginación alimentada por múltiples relaciones. Es así como me propuse crear una situación antropológica en la que la interacción audiovisual con los bailarines fuera una invitación a crear colaboración. Seguí el trabajo cinematográfico experimental del artista visual Maya Deren, considerada pionera en el desarrollo del lenguaje de la danza para la cámara, en particular por su obra Choreography for Camera, en la que explora el movimiento corporal y la coreografía. Según Douglas Rosenberg, la danza en la pantalla contradice la idea de la danza como experiencia vivida, puesto que cuando el cuerpo danzante entra en el ámbito de la tecnología, se convierte en un cuerpo modificado, construido, un cuerpo que puede existir o no, y que puede desafiar las leyes de la gravedad, la naturaleza y el tiempo. Es así como crear una danza en pantalla a partir de esta escritura corporal efímera es una forma no solo de ampliar las metáforas de los cuerpos danzantes, sino también de producir un artefacto cultural que expande la sensación de sinestesia a la vez que ralentiza el tiempo e incluso la respiración. Reuniendo estas posibilidades, quise crear una reconstrucción imaginaria de los desplazamientos que las poblaciones andinas han practicado durante miles de años. Así nació la danza en pantalla Yacana número 1. Yacana es el nombre que en la astronomía andina refiere a una constelación situada en el centro de la Vía Láctea. Sus formas evocan las figuras de una llama y su cría. Según las narraciones míticas, estos animales estelares viajan por el cielo nocturno para beber agua del mar, regulando el ciclo del agua de la tierra. utilicé esta historia que vincula las montañas con el mar para crear una obra audiovisual que hace referencia a estos movimientos en sus diversos estratos temporales y culturales. Creé una danza en pantalla que condensa los desplazamientos prehispánicos, las migraciones contemporáneas y el efecto político y terapéutico de las danzas andinas sobre las largas y traumáticas experiencias de discriminación y desarraigo impuestas por la ocupación colonial de territorios y cuerpos. Me gustaría que Yacana número 1 se concibiera como una alegoría que articula un deseo utópico de rescatar del olvido prácticas alternativas a la modernidad colonial. Pero es solo una imagen que establece una conversación ficticia con las múltiples temporalidades de la experiencia vivida. A través de una danza en pantalla, quisiera abrir una conversación antropológica que surge de experiencias compartidas, que experimenta intercambios y afectos mutuos. Considero que la danza en pantalla es un artefacto de comunicación e imaginación artística que, junto con la investigación antropológica, nos permite construir un conocimiento indisciplinado en correspondencia o reciprocidad con el mundo.
What a beautiful and powerful story that really, touched on the visual, sensorial, sounded, spiritual, decolonial in so many ways. And I thought it was a really nice thing to bring together. The first 3 provocations of today. Just checking if Andrea might have joined us. Maybe not. I'm sure lots of us will have questions for her and everybody else so far. I don't know if Sarah, you'd like to begin the formal Q&A session?
Sure. Well, the floor, as we said before, the floor is now open for questions to Pirko, to Brian, and to Andrea, although she's not here, so you have to save your questions for Andrea. But we could also talk about her ideas in this context. And so I throw the floor open. Please raise your hand or speak into your mic.
Or type something in the chat.
Or type something. So yeah, or type something in the chat. Yes, Christian.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to kind of raise a short discussion with the first presenter. I'm very happy with her philosophy, her presentations, and she raised a couple of important issues. I'll raise 3 of them, but I want to ask a question on one. She mentioned that there's more value to Western music in most institutions of study, based on how these things are structured, which is the case with many institutions of music. And also that we have some unbalanced thought between academic and indigenous music makers, which is also the case because many of us feel we're doing more important work than the indigenous music makers. But unfortunately, they are also doing very important work by creating the music that we leverage on in our studies, in our teachings, and so on. But what I'm interested in is the issue she raised, that we perhaps may stop studying music as merely human organized sound to look into all other aspects of it. So I would like to ask her what she proposes, for now, for us, so we can look at it in a broader sense and probably apply that in our new orientation as she's proposing for looking at music. I don't know if I am understood.
Thank you for your question. I actually was anticipating that I'm going to have this question, how to do this then. And at the moment, I and Glisana Harrison, we are experimenting together with Ishu, this Greenlandic drum singer, to create that kind of collaborative modes that would depart from or leave behind the idea that the Western way of thinking is the right one and the only one that should be obeyed. And we try to go into the real equal collaborative mode in our work. So we are experimenting. I don't have a other answer than that. So far, I think it's a lot about the attitude and perspective that we take when we are collaborating with people who come from another kind of worldview than this anthropocentric worldview that is so deeply embedded in all Western sciences. And so that we could understand that that's only one way of approaching the world that is very materialistic, as we know. As music researchers, we face it all the time that there's so much in music and the effect of music that cannot be measured or painted down in any kind of materialistic method. And so I have found lots of support and help from the philosophy of Luce Irigaray, who is a Belgian philosopher who has been writing about the theory of meeting of two. And it, if I describe it with my own words, is that it means that when you are discussing or collaborating or meeting somebody, you should understand that the truth is in between, and nobody owns the truth or the result. It is always in between. And this kind of attitude I think has helped me a lot when collaborating with people who don't come from this kind of anthropocentric background than I come from. And I have struggled a lot to try to leave it behind, because I really agree with this post-human critical view that this anthropocentrism has led us to this climate change, and that has to be changed. Otherwise, we are lost. So why shouldn't we adopt it also in music research?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Well, I actually have, I'll just fill the space here. I love this idea. I haven't read this from Luce Irigaray. Or how do you pronounce her name? I don't know. I in my mind, she's Luce Irigaray, but that's probably incorrect. But anyway, I haven't read her thinking on the truth is in between. This is a lovely way to center things. And to bring it to that very interaction, and then it's a persistently flexible and malleable center, right? Which really changes how we imagine. One thing that I have done with students is the opposite, which is to decenter everything. And so I create an imbalance in the way in which we think about Western art, Western music, and human-centric constructions of the world by imagining first that, of course, always by putting these ideas in their correct political, or in the tension of the political context. I try to ask my students to imagine what would it be if you inverted your worldview and imagined that the music of, or the performance cultures of a particular place was the center, not the West. So the West becomes, quote unquote, an imagined indigenous music. So Austrian music is the music of indigenous Austrians. Who's an indigenous Austrian in that moment? It's the people who are sitting in my classes. And then it's a game to some extent, but it generates a lot of very interesting, often conflict-filled questions. And that's even though there's no answer, and it's a mental game, it actually generates new ways of thinking about their own positionality, the positionality of Western music in the world, and it decenters it simply by making you look at it from another way. So in some ways, pushing it out and then also bringing the center right in, this is fantastic. That's really great. Thank you, Pirko. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Well, I think it's wonderful exercise as a classroom to do.
Yeah.
But to really change your way of thinking away from this human-centeredness, it's a hard task to do.
Yeah.
It is really demanding, but that really should be done. But it's important to do it with the students, because they are the ones who are creating the next step in music studies.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, Christian.
Yeah, it seems I'm the only one talking. Brian, I'm actually, I was hoping and waiting that an example, of the space music was going to be played, but you gave us the apology that no example was there. I was just thinking, even after you presented this, in a classroom situation where you're teaching students, how do you get into this space sound study with them? What's the pedagogical, process for it? Because here we're talking about decolonizing, and we're talking about, bringing a new generation of students and teachers who have a different perspective to our music teaching and learning. What would the process be in terms of the space music and pedagogy?
Thanks very much, Christian.
I don't have
you
a
can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. I appreciate the question. Thanks very much. I would say, first of all, that the short example I played for you, I would count as space music. So this is a Maori chant that actually, and the whole opening of that dawn ceremony was recounting the name stars. And so the stars are organized by what Maori call whakapapa. It means genealogy. So they're named in relation to the other one, sort of like parent and daughter. And so the way of kind of organizing this is within a Maori kind of indigenous kind of framework, not in a Western framework. And this is sort of chanted and recited over time, depending on the kind of tribal areas that are, chanting that. And there are some differences there. But the first thing I would say is that I find the three threads I was talking about are very much interlinked. So I find the indigenous song aspect really the kind of same as maybe what we're thinking of, science and space kind of things, really another integration of the same kind of thing, right, with different kind of sounds and kind of performance aspects. So I'd start there. I think it's a great question. To come to the pedagogy, to give you an example, the two of several people who are leading the indigenous component, Jerome Kavanaugh, Rugia Turner. So the last picture on my slide was from an instrument workshop. And they run these quite regularly in our university. They bring a lot of Maori instruments, and this is a tradition that's been kind of revived over the last 30 years. And what they're doing now is because again, these star names have, Maori names and histories and stories with them that go back to ancient stories and contemporary concerns. They're assigning Maori instrumental sounds to stars based on that relationship, that genealogy, right? So it's a Maori way of kind of approaching how this sounds. Now, this is in really contrast to a lot of what's online. I could have played one of these examples from NASA and others, which kind of seems to be, they're taking light data and signing it to sounds, but they're kind of picking, I don't want to sound, flippant here, but kind of like what sounds cool, kind of electronic sounds, kind of spacey sounds, maybe a symphony orchestra. And it doesn't seem to be a kind of methodology kind of based in culture or kind of where those objects are from. But because those space objects are deeply meaningful to Maori and they have a genealogy, relations that go back to the tribe, and the instruments do as well, they can be merged together. So what they're doing is coming up with a methodology of kind of doing that. That's a very different idea of sonification. And so they're doing this work through workshops and classroom teaching, which goes on here quite a lot. And the last thing I would say is that even the ideas of the kind of disciplines of science and these kind of things, the leading scientist on this is someone named Rangi Matamua. You can look up. He's a professor of astronomy. He's Maori. He wrote a book on this topic and really led to this kind of national holiday. So back to the centering, a lot of these ideas are really indigenous led, but not outside the university, kind of within the university, within science programs and indigenous studies. So it really crosses these disciplines quite well. And I think we've been bringing the kind of sound component kind of into it, which has been kind of new. I don't know if that answers, Christian, but happy to follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I have to get in touch with you for more details. I think so.
There is
Thanks.
actually a question
Yeah.
from Giulia Sala in the chat. Do you want to speak up, Giulia? Julia, I'm sorry.
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe we should just read it out loud, and that's why she's put it in the chat, I think. So the question in the chat says, from Julia Zala or Sala, does the sonification process implemented by NASA for sounds from space involve modification so that the sounds are audible to humans? This process makes space studies more accessible, but how is this modification considered reliable, quote unquote reliable, from a musicological perspective? I don't understand the implications of this adaptation adaptation. Thank you, she says. Brian.
Yeah, thanks very much for the comment. I mean, I would kind of agree with you in terms of the reliability. This is what I kind of mentioned at least, is that, a lot of organizations have been doing these kind of projects, but they seem to be kind of random. Like it just kind of like has a lot of publicity, but it doesn't seem to be based in any kind of particular cultural view or method, or it's really, I kind of, again, not to be flippant, but it's kind of another version of host the planets kind of thing, What we're doing is actually really basing this in a very indigenous kind of methodology. Again, because those kind of chants, the one I played for you, is another iteration of this. And so this is really a connection point that many see as not having much difference, depending on the, different kind of sounds. In terms of the kind of, let me see here, there's one thing I wanted to mention in terms of the kind of light and accessible. I would add that what we're talking about with the astrophysics is even things like what is a reliable light source if light is kind of beyond the human senses, for example. And second, where the sonifications have been really interesting is that NASA and others have been using them as another way of accessing data, for a sonic way of accessing what an object kind of appears like, if you will, without sight, for example. And there's been a lot of that kind of intersecting with disability studies, which we find really interesting as well. So it's a kind of another tangent of that, of accessing kind of this object and its forms and patterns and waves for someone who is unable to access it through sight. And there's also some tactile versions of this as well, kind of modeling that's been done as another way of kind of feeling through kind of astronomical objects. So, I mean, I don't have all the answers on it, but it's a really interesting way of kind of bringing a multi-sensory approach that I find quite interesting. Hope that answers, and very happy to follow up. Thank you.
That's great response, Brian. I mean, the other thing to say about humans is that, I mean, at least people who are watching a screen right now and participating, is that we are very sensorily capable at this point of watching and having sounds that describe what we're watching. We do this all the time in film and television and other things. And so that's become very very easy for us to understand. And so when you create a sound representation of something which is happening in space, you're already trained to know how to do that if you come out of this world. And so to see other ways of representing those same kinds of epistemologies is wonderful. I just wanted to, Brian, I'm sure you already know about this, but there's this wonderful film. I think the filmmaker's name is Susie Betts. And she's a Wirangu person from Northern Australia. And she has this fabulous film called Wirangu Story, or Songline, I think it is. And it tells their version of the Seven Sisters tale, which is the same constellation. Do you know it? Have you?
I do know it very much. Thank you. And there really is kind of global ramifications of this. And we'd like to kind of extend the project because the same cluster is everywhere, but it will have different, visual positions, but also sounds that kind of represent it. So it really has potential to kind of go global. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Soy Bang, I think that's a hand.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Brian. I'm very excited by your project, but I just want to ask whether you work with indigenous people on this project, and what do they really think about, your connections with astrophysics and indigenous sound?
Yeah, thanks, Soy Bang. As I kind of mentioned on I think my third slide, I mean, we have indigenous leaders as part of the project officially, both in the Pacific and here in New Zealand. There's a Pacific component I didn't get to mention that's on my slide. But this whole project of this cluster and the holiday has really been totally led by indigenous leaders in New Zealand. And that might be different from other kind of contexts. But this guy, Rangi Matamua, you can look him up, again, professor of astronomy in New Zealand, leading this was right there in the performance video, singing along, and been a leader in this. But absolutely, I would say it's actually led by Māori. What's very interesting is that the astrophysics, there are two people on my slide from the astrophysics department in our university who are not Māori, but they are fully steeped in Māori, astronomy, if you can call it that, practices. So they're very knowledgeable of this in terms of speaking, fluent in Māori. And so this is something that's quite, I think, common here in Aotearoa, that it's both Māori and Pākehā or non-Māori, but that Māori knowledge is kind of centered in the project. It's not kind of periphery. It's very much centered. So I would say yes. The two people leading this are Jerome Kavanagh and Rubia Turner, who are leading Māori instrument specialists. And they're kind of leading this methodology in part of the project with the astrophysics teams, with us in sound and music. But the broader kind of movement is completely Māori-led. And it's very interesting that the country has kind of taken it up. Not without, we certainly do have colonialism and racism. These things absolutely exist, as you would expect, but this is very much kind of Māori-led. And that's been quite interesting how the broader public has kind of taken it. Hope that answers, Soy Bang.
I guess, Shari, should we continue on with the presentations?
I have some thoughts, but we can share them later.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Add something now. It's fine.
Yeah, I was just thinking about our three provocations of today and how, a lot of it is about wiping the slate clean, but you can't really wipe the slate clean without dealing with all the trauma and stuff, things under the carpet. And, whether it's racism, colonization, or intergenerationality, or, disability and new forms of marginalizations, including climate precarity and job precarity and economic precarity. It comes along with it, and geopolitics. So one thing that I think a lot of people, which I've been thinking about a lot, inspired by a scholar called Cora Xu, is time and the sense of urgency. And I was just wondering how three of our, panelists today so far, and maybe later, have thought about, how all this relates to the sense of urgency with regards to non-human subjects, whether we're in a time of urgent crisis because of climate change and we only have that much amount of time to deal with this from an anthropocentric point of view, or from indigenous people's point of view, maybe like let the earth burn, what Dylan Robinson says in some ways, and how, specifically sound studies or music studies and dance studies and movement studies, however we want to define it, have a role to play in all of this. I'm sorry if my question is very broad and abstract.
Maybe Pirko, do you want to try an answer to that or a comment to that?
I don't think there's anybody has an answer to that, but what was really interesting to me was the discussions I had with the hunters in the northernmost Greenland, actually in the village that is the northernmost inhabited place on Earth. And so the discussion about climate change and about their observations in nature. And they said, yeah, sure, we see changes, but of course we're asking about how their game, the animals and fish, and which kind of observations they have seen about that. And they said, yeah, sure, they have observed changes, but the nature adapts, they said. And then we were of course asking that how about you, and you are dependent on the nature for your survival here in a very concrete way, and they said, well, we are part of nature, we adapt.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, I mean,
there we were, like these stupid Westerners who go, oh yeah, this climate change is hitting you most, well, what do you say about this? And we adapt. And then in further discussions about that were about the Greenlandic Inuit philosophy is that the everything is as it should be, and whatever difficulties there will be, they are for us to learn from.
Interesting. That's great.
Yeah, one of my learnings with working with Indigenous people was thinking about time and death differently, and I was quite shocked to hear from some elders that they were willing to let things disappear, and that was part of how they thought about the passing of time and the ephemerality of it. And I was just thinking, sound is also ephemeral, as is movement, and our bodies eventually. But I'll stop there.
Great. Brian, did you want to have a response to Shree's comment?
Kia ora, yeah, thank you. I guess I was following on that, thinking of the time component that, the three components of this kind of broader kind of national project, the holiday itself, the festivals around it, are very much about the calendar, right? The agriculture and planting, very earthly things, even though the stars are involved. So it's an Indigenous calendar that's very much, very present here that I haven't really seen in the last 15 years. So that's really kind of a cycle that's come back. At the same time, it has been dependent on Māori language being very much revived since the 1970s. And without this, I don't think it could have worked in the same kind of way. And so there's this, again, large kind of national movement that everyone, Māori and non, are kind of learning, Te Reo Māori, the Indigenous language here, which is very interesting where we're at. And then third, the instrument, the sounds of the instruments, the Māori sounds, that instrumental revival was also really new in the past 30 years. So those sounds that people were employing in this project have kind of in this cycle of coming back again from the 19th century. So there are these kind of cyclical time periods that people talk about that kind of bring these disciplines together in a really interesting way. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I think we should move on to the last two presentations for the session. And our first speaker is Brett Piper. Brett, will you introduce yourself? And then I'll ask Carlos to play the film. Not yet, just Brett.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sarah, and greetings, colleagues. I've really so much valued these dialogues since they began in 2021, and it's really wonderful to be with you today. I'm told that I'm taller in real life than on Zoom, and I wear spectacles and have short cropped hair. It is just around lunchtime and spring in Johannesburg, but before the summer rains arrive, there's lots of pollen and sneezing about, which I'm trying to contain. And just a very brief word of introduction to my work. I've been so excited by the transdisciplinary presentations thus far, and I've always been interested about the opportunities to engage with music across disciplinary boundaries. I'm now an associate professor in the Department of Curatorial, Public, and Visual Cultures in the Wits School of Arts, although I do teach jazz history and culture and supervise postgraduate research in music. So with that, Carlos, I'd be really grateful if you could play the video. Greetings, colleagues. It's an honor in present company to offer some thoughts and experiences in relation to the theme of today's dialogue, focusing on intersections between diverse bearers, forms, and ways of musical knowing. For much of the past decade, I've co-led with several colleagues in the Wits School of Arts in Johannesburg a project called Dance Research Africa. Through it, we've collectively explored a range of practice-based, practice-led, and artistic research approaches that we feel are germane to our transitioning and contested African cosmopolitan contexts. The participating colleagues and graduate students have drawn on a wide range of repertoires, methodologies, and cosmologies, and have demonstrated the affordances of embodied and even spiritual knowledge practices beyond those traditionally associated with the Euro-American avant-garde. My contribution today briefly illustrates one such approach among several others. Our colleague Samuel Araujo and his co-authors from the Grupo Musicultura in Brazil reminded us in their writing, well into the first decade of the current century, of the pressing need for what they called an unprecedented dialogue with the people we work with as researchers. The non-hegemonic traditions of music scholarship that these authors emphasized centered on moving ethnomusicology to consider the sharing of its time and investment in what they called seemingly prosaic, but in fact intellectually challenging and politically explosive directions. Such perspectives have resonated strongly with me in the settings in which I've been working with communities of musical practice amidst the still incomplete transition from apartheid in post-colonial South Africa. For decades, scholars have recognized jazz performance to have been among the remarkable cultural achievements of communities who bore the brunt of apartheid segregation, forced removals, and exile. There's of course been a need for studies of the more famous musicians, and to recognize just a few, here's some images of Hugh Masekela and Moving Clockwise, Miriam Makeba, Abdullah Ibrahim, and Begim Selekiwu, all of whom spent considerable parts of their careers in exile. But some researchers have pursued alternative lines of inquiry to those that would focus on musicians. And these were well described by my late colleague at Wits University, Professor Begizizwe Peterson, who was primarily a literary and a film scholar. Peterson recognized that apartheid as a system of government entailed not only economic and socio-economic policies, but notably de facto cultural policies that penetrated into the most fundamental elements of everyday life. He drew attention to how not only artists, but also citizens have proffered alternative narratives, senses of self, memories, and hopes for the future through recourse to what Peterson described as repertoires of living. Taking up Peterson's abiding interest in resistant quotidian repertoires of living, the work I discuss here draws attention to an often overlooked aspect of South Africa's famous jazz expressions, the social life of the music, and specifically the role that working-class jazz appreciation societies have played in creating culturally resonant social settings for listening, even in the absence of live performance. The social institution of groups of friends in segregated urban and rural townships forming societies to appreciate the music together, mostly in its recorded forms, has a long history and has been recognized by South African researchers Mapaya, Malinga, and Tobejane as a thriving subculture that's been supporting jazz in its development for almost a century now. The range of activities I'll reflect on have emerged from documenting and analyzing the resilience and the creativity with which jazz appreciation societies kept the music alive in communities despite apartheid's onslaught on famous sites of jazz sociability, often bulldozing entire neighborhoods. It foregrounds their contribution to the continuing struggle for autonomous, accessible, black public spheres in contemporary South Africa, while much of the world lurches in the other direction toward neoliberal forms of socioeconomic exclusion, or direct state control. The unprecedented circumstances attending the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021 yielded a crisis that not even forced removals and successive states of emergency under apartheid had precipitated for jazz appreciation societies, a blanket prohibition on social gatherings that effectively halted their practice. Faced with the existential predicament of how to sustain their culture and the sociability that's central to it, the collaboration that came to be called the Cosmopolitan Collective has acquired a significance far beyond what we anticipated. In the limited time available for our roundtable today, I'm going to refer colleagues interested in more detail about the collaboration, and especially the voices of our community partners, to the Cosmopolitan Collective's contribution to the ICTM multimedia publication Dialogues Towards Decolonizing Music and Dance Studies, edited, of course, by our colleagues Suibeng Tan and Marsha Ostashevsky in 2022. There's a quick glimpse of our insert in that publication. And so to make the most of the available time today, I'm going to interpolate my reflections here with a few annotated slides giving you a sense of the settings across which we've been working together over the past 5 years. The seemingly prosaic perspective I'm going to foreground arises from my work since the early 90s as a concert programmer in South Africa. In a time of profound political and social change, organizing concerts exposed me to formerly banned musics being performed openly to audiences who had often been barred from venues on the grounds of race by performers who'd recently emerged from underground or exile. It was an exhilarating and formative experience that also surfaced many critical questions about the problematics of cultural representation. In recent years, I've returned to programming in the public sphere with and for my research interlocutors and students. The distinguished critical theorist and museum anthropologist Ivan Karp has written, drawing on the sociology of Max Weber, that public scholarship requires sensitivity to the plural nature of life in society and the painful necessity to compromise with competing and conflicting goals. Though seldom deemed central to our discipline, concert organizing has, of course, long been recognized as an aspect of applied ethnomusicology. I've long questioned the underlying distinction between inquiry and its application in musical and other cultural contexts. Work in the public domain, it seems to me, can actually anticipate and initiate rather than follow after formal research activity. My experience has been that rather than offering mere platforms for presenting the outcomes of research, working with musicians, other professional participants, and audiences in backstage, onstage, and front of stage musical settings can be a valuable primary dimension of a research process. And though one needs to be intentional and realization is never guaranteed, a concert can explore a premise and advance an argument of sorts through the ways in which it's compiled, framed, and presented. And an example would be the slide that we currently are seeing, which was taken at a concert that we organized at the Wits Theatre on my campus in the October of the COVID-19 pandemic. You might be able to see in the background a slide that features Stephen Feld's monograph, its cover to Jazz Cosmopolitanism in Accra, which served as a prompt for a concert that explored jazz cosmopolitanism in Johannesburg and encouraged a Pan-African dialogue around these forms of hybrid expression. What emerged from this concert was an ongoing set of community-led initiatives. Here is an image of a concert we did in the subsequent months in December of 2020, and in a range of community settings for both adult and youth audiences, always dialoguing between community settings and university settings and exploring the resources and platforms that universities can offer. Here you see drone photography of a jazz appreciation session organized at the Arts Center of the University of Johannesburg that uses the configuration of a jazz appreciation session at a spatial level in ways that wouldn't have been possible in other venues. I'm going to conclude by making the point that concerts and festivals have their own rhetorics of value, a notion that's been developed by another respected museum anthropologist, Corinne A. Kratz, initially in an article in 2011 and in a new forthcoming monograph from Duke University Press coming out later this year. Kratz has shown how museums and exhibits communicate values and shape identities, not only by virtue of what they present, their content, but how, what she productively calls persuasive form. My point in wrapping up is that I think this argument pertains as much to concert organizing as to any form of museum or heritage display. In a very profound way, I think because the medium of concert organizing is the medium of practice, it makes forms of co-organizing and indeed an extended form of co-authorship possible that may not be possible in other contexts. And I look forward to dialoguing with you further in the light of this contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett. Again, can we all save our thoughts or put them in the chat in the time being? And maybe we can invite our next speaker, Urmimala Sarkar, to introduce yourself and let the film roll.
Hi, thank you for giving me this chance to speak to you from India. I'm currently in Portugal, but I'm speaking as a South Asian. I speak Bengali, Hindi, Gujarati, and English. I'm a dancer. I dance, I write dance, I research dance, and I love dance. I retired as a professor of dance studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and now I'm a senior fellow at the Prime Minister's Museum and Library in Delhi. I thank ICTMD once again. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I thank ICTMD for asking me to do this presentation. And I will be talking today on critical dance studies in India, a multidisciplinary space. In the last 35 years or more, dance studies has begun to force its way into the Indian academic arena, even though its progress has been without much support from the university system. It has been too slow and unsure of its utility and focus areas. On the contrary, dance from the colonized South Asia has been researched as a part of the colonial ethnography and anthropology and from within Western dance research, and often taught in courses on world cultures and dance. The first generation of the new, well-known Indian dance scholars also began their journeys as in the late 70s and 80s in different universities in the US and UK and their journeys began by most of them traveling from India to do their PhDs on dance from their exotic home country. Much of the intellectually stimulating philosophical discourses on body as the political, cultural, resistive tool and the philosophical research remained largely controlled by the Western scholars. Over the years, the gaps in academic scholarship in dance within India has strengthened the urgency to create an alternative and inclusive space for embodied practices that are embedded within everyday lives of different communities from different parts of India. many a times this particular need has risen from the kind of partial recognition of all that is dance from India. It was led by the realization that a strong sense of hierarchization has been created within the dance discourse by the culture and tradition-centric judgments. As a result, in the post-colonial discourse, superior positions were designated for the neoclassical dances that were fashioned and curatorially created from community practices of specific geographies within India. Most everyday activities that included ritual and social performances, embodied expressions of thoughts, devotions, emotions, knowledge, and movement-based physical communications about the self, community, gender, festival seasons, and life in general were excluded as non-specific, non-specialized, mundane, participatory activities that did not match the expertise and skill involved in the higher forms of presentational dances. Fortunately, the methodology for research in critical dance studies could not remain bound within the sphere of studies of historical origins and development of classical dance. In the first phase of dance studies, the writings in dance history reflected the deep-rooted bias with which the elite Hindu majority looked at community dance practices of the indigenous and the other non-elite dancing bodies. But the newly independent nation needed to use the folk and tribal dances to showcase cultural diversity of the masses and the range of ethnicness of the Indian people. They were therefore required to be put under a special category where they were clearly part of the exhibition-like circumstances, such as the Republic Day parade or Indian festivals held abroad, but never deemed fit to be representative of Indian high culture. At the same time, trained upper class women dancers became the representatives of the national culture, the high national culture, as their dance became an easily exhibited audiovisual emblem of India's glorious past, all the while marginalizing and invisibilizing professional women dancers from temple or entertainment traditions. These hierarchies needed to be addressed. Critical dance studies was shaped in India to make available a multidisciplinary theoretical and methodological framework where the scholarship on Indian dance has continued to grow tentatively yet parallel to practice, while coping with increasing political propaganda using dominant Hindu narratives and restrictive and controlling patronage of the governmental agencies. And a fast-changing dance ecology. More and more number of students are leaving India for getting degrees from foreign universities on topics on dance in South Asia and more specifically India. But they are inevitably ghettoized and forced to restrict their research within their own dance ecology. One hardly finds such restrictions imposed on the Western scholars who have long since been venturing into once colonial or racially marked spaces in South Asia, exercising their inherited rights as a legacy of the colonial control over knowledge. Dance studies thus remains a deeply problematic post-colonial, neo-colonial space. My recent book, Mapping Critical Dance Studies in India, focuses on a multidisciplinary research methodology for critical dance studies in India. keeping in mind the overemphasis on the popularly known elite and upper caste history of dance in regional discourse, the book acknowledges that the study of dance and dancers almost never escapes existing and evolving power hierarchies. These include exploitations based on class, caste, gender, religion, and ethnicity based complexities that restrict intersectional dialogues and patronage. Extant literature largely focuses on historic and aesthetic representation of dance only, ignoring emerging spaces of documentation, screen and digital interventions, and expanding movement genres in the contemporary world of embodied art practices. With the understanding that dance discourse has remained descriptive, celebratory, and non critical, I have suggested that to identify any activity as dance or embodied art, one must analyze the range of functions it performs for the particular community in which it belongs. It is important in the changing geopolitical context to create an alternative method of researching and writing dance by exploring the uses of tools from dance history and historiography, ethnography, philosophy, and dance analysis, as suggested by dance studies scholar Janet O'Shea, but also, additionally, to place critical dance studies in and from India in the global space of dance research. A strong practice theory interface needs to be developed using the intersectional research facilitated additionally by ritual studies, gender studies, as well as cultural studies and anthropology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Urimalar. I think we can open questions to the floor.
Indeed. Maybe we'll start with the panel, and we'll privilege the panel for a few minutes if there are people who have questions for anybody in the panel, and then we'll move to opening the floor completely. So panel members, hello, what have you got?
So if I can just hop in, and I want to thank Subeng and Marcia for just bringing our work into collaboration, because into dialogue, because I was struck how many threads move between our presentations. And it's really encouraging because often, of course, one works in relative isolation in one's own geography, to get a sense that in all the spaces that were represented today, colleagues seem to be working in resonant directions. So thank you so much for that.
Great. Other comments from the panel?
I mean, I could maybe also second Brett and probably a lot of other people thinking the same thing. I've always found ICTMD spaces to be one of the most inclusive in all the academic conferences that I've been attending. We have multiple languages happening in a virtual space and people from all over the world. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot, not to add yet another kind of axis of marginality, is academic privilege, and how the way we explain our stories or work with our interlocutors as collaborators and how they're represented is also maybe something that I know we've been thinking about. And I really celebrate and love the fact that there are so many different ways of telling stories that are theoretical, deeply grounded, common sense, some may say, and incidental, anecdotal, as well as very abstract. And I think this is just so wonderful. So I salute, the community of ICTMD. And if you want me to decolonize myself, I will speak in Singlish. If you want my Singlish accent, also can.
Also can. Love it. Oh, that's great, Shuri. That's a really great comment, and I think it's actually true. I'm just thinking back to all 5 presentations. Each of you is challenging and has described, to some degree, challenging an epistemological norm or approach to the way in which knowledge and sound and movement are constructed in your own fields or in your own areas of research. And I'm just wondering, have you as a group encountered resistance? And I'm not sure where that resistance would come from. I think it could come from a variety of places. And I wonder if I could ask you both, all five of you, or if anyone has a burning desire to talk about this, to spend some time describing this resistance, and then what your response to it was.
So, surprisingly, the resistance often comes from the people who are doing Indian dance research, in my case, and South Asian dance research. Because it doesn't, I mean, even now, all that is dance doesn't include all that is dance. It has to be, for Indian dance, it has to be classical, it has to be upper caste, it has to be a different type of a thing. And in the world, I see it as a very, very neo-colonial kind of space, because all that the scholars write now have to be reviewed that has to be in English, that has to be reviewed for journals which are all owned by American and UK or European spaces. And also, I think smaller countries in Europe may face the same kind of problems in terms of language related kind of, the way in which the control works in the world, and how the whole thing, the representation, the scholarship is not even ready to accept that there is a parallel kind of vernacular scholarship that is developing, etc. And I think, just token acknowledgement that, there are dance scholars there, that's one level, but it's very, very partial and very problematic, even now. Yeah, especially just the South Asian context I can take. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe I can. Do you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you for this question, because I think it's all too seldom discussed that which kind of resistance we get as scholars. And of course, as somebody who studies indigenous musics and is not indigenous herself, of course, I face lots of these kind of questions. For instance, when I was invited to write an article about heritization of Nepalese music for the journal Alternatives, that is, the journal is dedicated to indigenous studies. And one of the reviewers asked me, who are you to represent these people? And then of course, I understood that I have to explain my relationship with the Tamu people that I wrote about. And then, of course, also among the Sami, there are Sami people who resist anything that is done by non-Sami regarding Sami. So I'm sure everybody has this kind of, there are different kinds of political attitudes. And that is in every field, I think. Like the Sami people, they used to joke nowadays that among themselves when they discuss that, do you have your anthropologist already? That it's so common that the outsiders come and study. But I think it works both ways, that there is no way out other than respecting each other. And as long as we give up our thought of being representing the right kind of knowledge formation, then maybe in this case, the indigenous people also finally can, or all of them can accept that they can benefit from exchange of knowledge formations and knowledge. Mm. So of course there's resistance. I think everybody on every field faces it.
Ormi has reminded me that we didn't have a specific moment just for questions for Brett and Ormi. So we will, if please add your questions here and ask them. in addition to responding to these other questions. The floor is definitely open for that. Are there other questions specifically for Urmimala and Brett? Yeah, Brett.
So if I may actually just put a question to Urmi, and thank you so much for your work. And obviously we both share an interest in the kinds of recontextualized spaces in which dance performance is happening. And particularly complex when states are involved. And given the federal situation in India, I'm aware of the kinds of contestations happening between places like Kerala and the national government. And so I'm wondering what the implications are for the arguments you're making in your work of the state's claim at various levels to, in a sense, appropriate culture. And what happens in these performative modes of presentation that you think we perhaps as scholars need to intervene in?
Thank you for that question. It actually gives me some time to explain what this started as. I mean, this is not the current dispensation's beginning to do things differently. It has been done since post-independence as a cultural policy of presenting the nation. And it is not for the first time that these people are doing it. It's just being extended to serve different purposes at the time. What happened was that the state started representing certain practices, and that was presented as the state, the actual dance. And the others were taken as that hierarchy began there, that others were not dance enough. They didn't have enough, variety. They repeated the same words. These were seasonal songs, not really for international audience. Categorization can go on and reasons can go on. But this was the beginning. So what has happened now is that the scholarship also started reflecting what is important, what is dance. And that itself is the problem, because it was a double marginalization and accumulation by dispossession, as per David Harvey's theory, because, when one party accumulates, by dispossessing the others of cultural wealth, that's what has been happening. And with time, a long time, that's something that is accumulating to be really dispossessing to the others. And I think this theory goes very well to show the situation. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And if I could just quickly add, Urmi, then this seems to me a perfect example of where the artificial separation between applied work or sort of pure research just doesn't work. It's fascinating how scholarship may have been taking its cue from a sort of uncritical public presentational practice in India.
Exactly. And pedagogy, growth of pedagogy on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add one comment. In Indonesia, exactly the same thing happened, Urmimala. As the national culture was being constructed in the post-colonial context, many actually it was turned into it was an Indonesianized word of the concept of upgrade. So it was di-upgradekan, which meant that an indigenous dance from somewhere in Indonesia was cleaned up, taken off whatever its normal presentation world was, and then put on a national, on a proscenium arch stage. And then it could be marketed or could travel around Indonesia and the rest of the world representing Indonesia, because it was cleaned up and, looked neat like all other performances.
Yes.
And that then generated, it was appropriated by its own national world, but at the same time, it was also trying to market it and to send it out to represent the plurality of Indonesia. But at the same time, it had this extreme narrowing effect on what could actually be chosen by the different states within Indonesia for representing. So, it sets up an internal hierarchy, which then parallels and reflects the larger world hierarchy. And this is something that I think maybe we don't talk. I mean, individual case studies talk about it, but the fact that it's gone over around the world is really something that we should talk about a lot more. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
I can also add, you just have to look at neo-colonial Singapore and its arts policies to see how this is practiced. But I also think that, there is maybe a case to be made for looking at individual agencies. I work with a lot of international students from East Asia, and specifically China, who is like, why are you telling me I can't have my white man with beard in the classroom since I paid so much money? And it's a different way of looking at decolonization from a completely different kind of shifting geopolitics, intergenerational as well. It's not just, global north and south or east and west. And I find that really interesting and challenging to negotiate and also to learn and find myself questioning my own, moral values as well in the process, which I hope is a good thing.
I mean, are we then becoming patronizing and paternalistic when we say, sorry, you have to listen to this indigenous music from someplace because I don't want to teach Beethoven anymore, or I think Beethoven represents, the entire world of the colonial, whatever. I mean, you could say it's equally as monopolizing and colonizing, which is also problematic.
Yeah. I mean, what really heartens me is that because of the situational politics that keep on changing at the very moment, people start, like your point earlier on about thinking about Austrians as indigenous, and like decolonization in some way doesn't work within the UK, where what does indigenous mean?
Really.
People could do Mars dancing. But anyway. But I think forcing ourselves to be at the frontiers of having these uncomfortable and difficult conversations is where I think the most meaningful work is being done. And I realize that I'm using very Angmo language, academic language to talk about this. But I will decolonize myself and speak in Singlish from now on.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, great. Yes, Bang.
Yeah, I have a question for Brad. Because you said that the praxis that is used in organizing concerts and festivals, they communicate values and they are a persuasive form. Can you expand a bit more about what you mean by its persuasive form?
Sure, thank you, Swee-Bing. So it's a concept I've borrowed from Corinne Kratz, the museum anthropologist, and she argues that, firstly, at a very basic level, the mere fact that an exhibition is there, the idea that I'm going to always sort of resituate things in the context of music now. The fact that something's been programmed on a concert stage already carries an implicit value judgment that says this is worth paying attention to. This is what a public should be listening to. But it doesn't stop at the level of content. How it's presented, how it's framed, is laden, of course, with value judgments. And she argues that cultural presentation generally, whether it's museum exhibits or heritage presentations, and I'm extending this into the contexts of live musical performance, it invites people to pay attention to certain things in favor of others. We've already had some very good examples in terms of the example that Sarah just listed in the Indonesian case of the kinds of cleaning up or upgrading that happens. Aesthetic judgments are made. There are ways in which an audience is persuaded to listen and to deem something inherently as being special. And this is one of the wonderful things about concerts. Concerts can be inspiring and enlightening and expose people to new ways of knowing. But there's a great responsibility attached to that, Kratz would argue, and that is, to make audible and to make explicit the kinds of recontextualizations that are happening. So I think there's a need for something that I would call a kind of critical practice of exhibition that invites audiences as well as the other professionals who work around musicians, the sound engineers, the lighting engineers, the people who take decisions on staging, etc., to realize that music changes its meanings when it moves between contexts, and especially the kinds of culturally embedded musics that ethnomusicologists have traditionally valued. And to maybe invite a public awareness of what maybe gets left out or left behind or changed, or perhaps even what gets new values added to it when music moves into a new kind of space. But it does mean that we stop just looking at the organizational decisions that are taken when one plans a concert. One stops seeing them as neutral, one stops seeing them as merely administrative or sort of pragmatic, and one starts seeing them as forms of implicit argument and that they are laden with values. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you have. Thank you very much. But I would like to ask Urmi now, like, do you think that this kind of praxis, can be included in your framework for, dance studies, critical dance studies?
See, it is already an effort, because one of the things that I think is that there is a debate about this word decolonization, where the shift is very conveniently to now shift the blame to, within India, caste class related problems, and how that is our problem and not the remnants of colony that we carry on. And, in that, we need to understand that decolonizing actually for us needs to be at the level of the neocolonization, facing the fact that neocolonization is a real active threat. Because in our classroom, when we study dance studies, there are hardly the people who we are talking about as the others. They are still not in our higher studies classrooms. So who are we talking about? Are we talking about, the people who still dance in everyday life, in their rituals, in their marriages? And we have moved away in the cities from having any idea about dance in everyday life. We go to dance bars or discotheques and completely differently dance. Our people have de-linked themselves from the life of the exotic. So for us, they have become the other, and within the whole country, there is this othering. So I am saying that yes, dance studies has been trying, because that is why this critical dance studies emerges as something which does a lot of intersectional studies, which does cultural studies. Of course, it's an ongoing battle, uphill task, because from within the practice community, there is a lot of resistance.
We should probably throw the floor open to anybody who wants to speak. And I'll just add something while you're thinking of your question. I'll just add something to Urmimala's comment there. In fact, this argument on the Western art music stage has been going on for people who do contemporary musics for as long as contemporary musics have been constructed as contemporary. So probably the middle of the 19th century. And there's this constant battle. And what you're describing is this ongoing battle that we have within cultures itself about what is canon, what is canonical, and what is not, and what is outside and what is in. And whether or not, and then here you get to the Frankfurt School and everybody arguing about money, because is a Taylor Swift concert better, more important than a Boston Symphony Orchestra performance, which features one new music conductor, or one new music piece, and 3 old chestnuts of various sorts? Because all of those people are trying to balance the relationship between audience and performance and expectation. I mean, this is an incredibly complicated part of understanding how we construct performance. And so it's not just an aesthetic and a moral one, it's a financial one. It's about the existence of the performing entities, etc. I mean, it's just huge.
Yeah, it is occupational. Its occupational implications are always, for the margins, much more debilitating than the others. Yep.
Indeed. on the margins. It's true.
People and genres that have power and money do not give up easily.
Exactly. That's a great comment. People and genres. I love this.
So actually, similar kind of what you described from Indonesia and India, from India, it's also happened in Nepal, that some of the original indigenous dances have taken to the stage, and they are representing the variety of ethnicities in Nepal to the tourist performances and also abroad. But the performances have hardly any resemblance with the original performances. I have followed some, so they are like, maybe you can recognize a melody and one instrument and some dance movements, but it's no longer the same at all.
Yeah, indeed. So, questions, comments for anybody on any theme?
May I ask? You, Sarah, had this wonderful question about do we meet any resistance? And this is a similar kind of bigger question to ask. How do you negotiate the imbalanced power relations on your field? This is to everybody.
Great question. Brett, go ahead.
So just a quick go. I mean, at some level, I've been inspired by the extent to which today's 5 cases have all problematized questions of discipline and invite us to practice music research outside of a narrow musicological frame, although it's, of course, absolutely doable to also study music within that space. So one of the tactics I've found to overcome the kinds of resistance that are almost hardwired into how the disciplines are organized. Most music departments in the world would welcome and prioritize performance, composition, or perhaps musicology. And the kind of interests that many of us were sharing today actually reached outside of those frames. And I think the kinds of alliances that have been illustrated across the presentations today, whether it's with astrophysicists, with philosophers, with people doing indigenous studies in various other contexts and so on, are really opportunities to build bridges and practices that offer ways around places of resistance, maybe, even if they don't quite dismantle those resistances. That's one suggestion.
Great.
Just to add briefly from me to the question, and I didn't get to answer the question about resistance so much, but in New Zealand, I would find that it's actually less of the astrophysics, but more certainly music departments that offer the most resistance, which probably resonates with at least some of you here. I think just following Brett, I think a strategy, I think, really comes down for me the personal and the kind of dialogue that we're talking about, but at a really sharing of a personal level. So in a kind of Māori perspective, at some level, people invite you into their home to share a meal, and the kind of conversations that follow that kind of strategy and kind of care and relationship tends to break down things and put them at a really different level when you bring in the personal. And I think that kind of strategy is one to kind of form allyships and to kind of meet halfway and find dialogue. So thank you all.
Great.
I love your answer. Thank you. I think it's about how we interact with other human people.
And non-human.
Yeah, can I just add?
And non-human in the post-human world, we have to kind of go beyond.
Yeah, can I add a bit to the answer?
Sure.
Yeah, I think I've been working with I've been fighting the state for a very long time at the university and all that, right? But I find that one useful strategy is actually to work with communities and heritage bearers, because they are the people who have the knowledge. And if we can collaborate with them and make sense of what they are trying to do and what they say, then I think the authorities will begin to listen. Yeah, so this is what is happening now, in Malaysia.
It's always good when authorities of any sort listen. It's not a usual experience, I think. Yeah, so we have just 2 more minutes. There's a nice comment here from Aline Delane. She says, thank you for an excellent session. As my colleague Orla Ni Brian, I probably have ruined that. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I apologize. And I meet with a new cohort of MA ethnochoreology and ethnomusicology students sitting together around a seminar table and engaging with a variety of music and movement practices. We are grateful for the inspirations and provocations provided by the ICTMD dialogue. So thank you so much. And please bring your students and continue contributing, because it's really, this is the heart of where all the really interesting things that I like to think about are happening. This is the place. Yeah. So are there final comments?
Yes, I would just like to point out that this is the first of our second series of this year. So I will post in the chat, but you can very easily Google ICTMD 2025 Dialogues and register for the next one, which I think is going to be happening in the next month, November. Yeah. Sorry, in 2 months.
October or November, sorry.
October.
October.
Right.
Yes. And that we have a treasure trove of meetings past recorded on YouTube. If you just Googled or whatever platform you're using, ICTMD Dialogues. And Sarah has just posted it. And I was just thinking about, what are our duties and responsibilities when we're dealing with challenges. And I've always sort of felt stuck in the middle sometimes, but maybe that's the best place to be. You become interlocutors in whatever with your privilege as well as minorizations and different kinds of marginalities. We are able to be liaisons, and absorb shocks in some ways that we can't from different directions. Just as other people are also absorbing, the different shocks of dealing with authorities or power or the shock of just difference. So that's what I'm.
The shock of difference. That's a great. There's the shock of the new and there's just the shock of difference. Yeah, that's great. Well, it's officially the hour. And so I think we probably should stop. Maybe we could go one more. If there's a burning question, we could incorporate it. I'm just waiting to see if anyone gets their hands up. Of course, all of us, all speakers and the organizers, etc., are available by email. You can find us on the ICTMD websites, and we encourage people to reach out if there are references to ideas or to publications that you missed or you would like to hear about again, or just if you want to say hi and engage, we're welcome, and you're welcome to do that, and we're all available. And I think I turn to Shari to see if there's any other. Do you want to close it out? Why don't you close us out?
Just to say thank you, everyone. And I think that there is a chat log, so I think lots of further sharings are there. And see you at the next round in a month's time. So, yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for your help.
Yes, thank you, Carlos.
And thank you, Soy Bang and Marcia, for all the